Can you touch a prayer? Can you pull it close and feel its comfort? You can if it's part of a prayer quilt. This year, the First UMC Prayer Quilt Ministry celebrates its 20th anniversary. For 20 years, this ministry has combined the gift of prayer with the gift of a hand-tied quilt. The idea behind these quilts is simple yet powerful. A heavy thread is used to take stitches through the quilt layers, and the ends are left free to be tied with a square knot. As each knot is tied, a silent prayer is offered for someone in special need, someone who has asked us to pray for them. This quilt is given to that person. What makes each quilt so special is not the pattern, color, or workmanship, but the fact that prayer is symbolically tied into each one. These comforters are a statement of faith and a testimony to our belief in God and in the power of prayer. For those at First UMC who have received a quilt, prayed over and tied a quilt knot, requested a quilt for someone, or received a prayer or pocket square, we have all been greatly touched by this ministry. To honor this ministry's work, we look back at its history with two of its founders, Sue Payne and Miley Marquand.
In our church, what happened was in 2003, we were having a Companions in Christ class that several of us were in, and one of the sessions we talked about spiritual gifts. As part of that discussion, she had been part of the youth leadership at that time, and she had taken the kids to another church somewhere down in San Diego, and that church had a prayer quilt ministry. And she came back and said it was so touching and explained what happened and how meaningful it was. So then in the spiritual gift component, I was saying, the one thing I know I'm good at is sewing. I wish there was a way to sew for the church. I don't know how to do that. I was like, well, maybe we could have this ministry at our church. And I don't think we would have brainstormed that if we hadn't had the class setting where we were encouraged to really be thinking about what we could do with our talents.
And I had just retired from my full-time job, and I too am a sewer, and this just fit right in. So I said, let me do some investigating and do some looking into how all of this will work. And so we spent a couple of months doing that and ultimately proposed it to Patricia Ferris and to the church council, and we were able to start in July of 2003.
We felt that God was behind this because one of the local quilting shops here in the area donated a bunch of completed tops and quilts to us, samples that they had used but no longer had a need for, and we were able to repurpose them into prayer quilts. And gosh, they gave us some of the materials at a discount and things like that just to get us started. Members of the congregation did donate some things to us: sewing machine, ironing board, irons, fabric. And then some
money.
And money, which was even the greatest, because we could then go buy whatever it was we didn't have.
And we didn't know how, if we were going to be able to produce enough quilts at the beginning either, to fill a need. And again, God was with us every step of the way, because rarely did we have to. In fact, I can't even remember a time where we had to tell somebody, you're going to have to wait a week or so. I don't think we ever had to do that. We always had a quilt that was okay for whatever the situation was.
We quickly put out the call. Anybody who was interested, you don't have to be a sewer, but come to this meeting. And I kind of think there were about 15 people initially.
I've been in it for 20 years. I just love being a part of the prayer quilt ministry, the friends that I've made here, and the wonderful, not just the quilts, but the prayer squares, the pocket squares. And I've given them to my sister-in-law, my brother-in-law, my neighbor, a couple church friends, and they all just are so grateful. We can retie quilts when somebody has a second issue, and I've sent them out of state, and it's just wonderful knowing how much you make people think about all the people that have prayed for them. And someday I might get one, and I know I'll be prayed for. So I love it.
We start our meetings with a circle where we start with prayer, and we do a little bit of catching up with all of us, just to catch up where we are since the last month, and also to show the work that we've done. So people who have worked at home will, bring back the things that they finished at home, and we share those and to go on to the next step.
Most of the sewing actually happens at home. People take things home, they take a kit home or whatever the work is they're going to do, and then they bring it back. And here in our meetings, we do the things that either need multiple people, like layering quilts where you have the back and you have some batting to make it a little bit puffy and a little warmer, and then the top is done by several people on a Saturday workshop day. The other thing we do in the group is we make kits for people to take home to do. Prayer square kits, kits to make tops, completed tops, back kits, completed tops and backs to layer. And the idea is anybody who's in the ministry will know that they can come in here even if we're not having a meeting, and they know where to put stuff or where to grab from. One of the things that we've always liked to say is our quilts already have multiple hands involved in making them. So I can't say, this is my square. It's almost a little bit of a prayer to be working on these, because they're going for a special need. And so you've got multiple prayers going on even before the quilt has gotten into the congregation, where we're hoping that everybody's praying, and as many as possible come up and put in ties. I would say if your fingers aren't nimble, you could go to the quilt and put your hand on it and say a prayer, and that's another way to do it, so that you're adding prayers to the quilt.
One way or another, most people who come to church regularly have been impacted one way or the other. They have either received a quilt, they have sponsored a quilt, they have donated to the quilt ministry, or they've tied a knot when the quilt is at the front of the church and hanging on the wall, or the prayer squares for all the mission teams. So those, one way or another, I think most people have had some sort of impact.
So many people find it comforting, and so many people who sponsor them do it partly because they don't know they can't fix whatever's going on with the person. And so this is one thing they can do. People are always trying to help somebody who's in need. The prayer quilts are for people who are in need of prayer for whatever reason, whether it's a health issue or some bad situation going on in their lives. The most touching thing to me is still that quote that we were given one time at there used to be conferences where we would go to and hear more about what other churches were doing for prayer quilts. Somebody said, are you okay? To the sick person the person who was sick would receive me. He said, how can I be anything otherwise? I'm covered in the cross of our Lord, because we put a cross on the back of all of them, and I'm surrounded by the prayers of his people, meaning all the prayers, knots and prayers that were sort of blessed into the quilt were. I just always thought, oh, what a great statement.
In 2014, I was diagnosed with sudden death syndrome. I had just that Sunday decided that I would become a member of First United Methodist Church. And while I was in the hospital, I received a prayer quilt from this church. People who didn't know me prayed for me. And that was just amazing to me. I could not believe that so many people decided to pray for me that didn't know me. And the quilt was beautiful. They chose a quilt with rows of roses, they said, because there were strips of material that were all roses. And I made a decision at that point in time that I would definitely join the prayer quilt ministry.
The goal is to encourage prayers. It really isn't supposed to be about, oh, I want the prettiest quilt I can find. it's really about praying for people. And if you're the recipient, when you receive the quilt, you can feel the knots because they're square knots, and you know that somebody was praying for you. It's not everybody writes us a thank you letter, but enough people do where they're saying how much they appreciate it and how touching it was and how comforting it was to feel the knots or some variation of that.
Your wonderful talents are only exceeded by your love and compassion. It's a healing talisman. It is interesting how easy it is to say thank you or hello, but more interesting is how much appreciation and emotion can build up in these simple phrases. It is my security blanket for the rest of my life. It is not often enough that we come across people who really are filled with love and compassion and generosity, and who have a talent for sharing their gifts with others.
There's reasons that people leave, but there's very few people who've left. Mostly people stick around unless they move. And I attribute that to feeling good about what they're doing, because we hear such great stories about what happens to the quilts when they go to people, and also just the friendliness of feeling like these other people are your partners in this. They're all good people.
I've been a member of the prayer quilt ministry for many years, and I've seen the gorgeous quilts that go out to everybody and the heartfelt prayers, and the people that tie the squares saying a prayer as they do it. And then it hit my family. Our older daughter had a very aggressive breast cancer, and it was very, very traumatic, and our family is away from us. No one is around here. So we were flying at that point to Salt Lake City a lot, and we asked her at the time, I gave her a purse girl, and then asked her if she wanted a quilt, and she said yes, that would really make her feel good. And so she sent us what she thought were important things to her going through this process. And I remember that morning because I was also in choir, and I stood up and I mentioned to the choir members about what was going to be happening, and a prayer quilt was in church, and it was for our daughter. And I'm telling you, getting choked. At the end of the service, watching all the choir members and the church members go over and tie squares and say a prayer was so incredibly comforting to us, my husband and I. And you know, we've been members of this church for almost 57 years. So this was really, really special. And I'm seeing it go on and on and on and touch many, many individuals. So I just want to say thank you. It's a wonderful, wonderful opportunity for ministry.
I feel like some of the smaller things that have come along just sort of came along, and they're, oh yeah, we should do that too. We should do prayer squares. Hey, we should send them with our work teams. Oh, let's make baptismal squares for little babies. Let's make confirmant squares. And then the most recent, hey, these are really handy. There's special times when these are just the right thing. So maybe there's something else out there that we haven't thought of yet.
There could be.
Hasn't come up, but it would be nice to have people ready to go. Yeah, keep an open mind.
I guess as long as I can sew a straight line, I want to be involved. So.
We thank the Prayer Quilt Ministry for their tireless dedication and faithfulness to their work. If you would like to know more about the ministry, volunteer opportunities, and how you may offer support, contact the church office or visit the website.
So what do you think? Is that looking and sounding good? Yeah, okay, we're moving along.
That was an action shot. I don't know if you got it or not.
And it was perfect, you guys are running.
This is how we tied them.